Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, where we'll be taking a deep dive into this year's unusual Black Friday, and how brands can best prepare to seize on the opportunity ahead. I'm Daniel Shapiro, Vice President of Brand Relations here at Redpoints, and I'll be your host today. It's fair to say that Black Friday has been a shopping phenomenon for the millennial. It has survived the economic crisis of 2008, although that year Black Friday did shrink during that particular economic struggle. Now, with social distancing restrictions limiting the capacity of retail stores in many cities, counties, and states, this year's Black Friday is shaping up to be a very unique shopping experience. One thing for sure is more sellers will enter the marketplace, and to do business in this climate, both legitimate and illegitimate sellers, unfortunately. And unless brands act quickly, they will be missing out on this unique opportunity to recover some of the sales that have been lost during this very difficult year. Brands more than ever need to focus on their online ecosystem to support the legitimate sellers and enforce counterfeits ahead of this year's holiday shopping. But before I go any further, let me introduce today's fantastic panel. I'm very excited to be joined by Jay Kennedy, Assistant Professor at the Center for Anti-Counterfeiting, Product Protection, and School of Criminal Justice at Michigan State University. Welcome, Jay, and maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and how in the world did you get into exploring counterfeits?
Thank you, Daniel. Thanks for the introduction. Very, very happy to be here. Thanks to Redpoints for inviting me. So I kind of fell into counterfeiting just because I came to MSU. As I was finishing up my PhD, my research has centered on crimes committed against business, and the Center for Anti-Counterfeiting had a position that opened up, and it really aligned well with not only my industry experience, but my desire to help companies deal with the risks that they face in the environment, not only internal threats due to employee theft, which is one of my other main areas, but also these external threats. And to be honest, I didn't know much about product counterfeiting when I first came to the center. And so I had to learn on the ground. And it's been a great experience. I hope that today gives me some more insight to this phenomenon. And it's a great opportunity for all of us to grow together and better understand this issue so that we can mitigate those threats that are currently emerging.
Totally true. And I look forward to it as well. And also joining us today is one of my colleagues, Oliver Bolton, head of our solutions engineering team. And Ollie, I'll let you do a quick introduction of yourself.
Man, thanks, Daniel. Very happy to be here. So I head up the pre-sales team here at Redpoints, essentially just talking through with prospects about how the application of technology can really help to counteract this impact of counterfeiting and so on the online marketplaces. So very happy to be here.
Well, thank you both. And with that, I just want to share with you today's presentation will be based from our annual Black Friday market research. Each year, Redpoints interviews about 1,000 US shoppers to understand the shopping behaviors ahead of Black Friday. And this year's results are pretty impressive. So feel free to download your report today if you haven't already done so. You may go to redpoints.com/resources to grab a free copy of this report. Pretty interesting stuff. And I'll share some of the highlights today. Now, moving on to the agenda, we'll kick off the session with an overview on how COVID-19 has changed shoppers' behavior and are set to impact this holiday season. The second part of the webinar, I'll be joined by Jay, where we'll have a conversation about the impact of counterfeits, especially as it relates to this year's Black Friday sales. And Jay will share his thoughts on what online platforms he believes brands should keep a close eye on this Black Friday and why. Then our third part of the webinar will share some actions brands can take to protect their IP and ultimately prevent a risk to online revenue and brand reputation damage, which is something else we'll talk about. Just to give everyone a quick overview of Redpoints for those of you who may not know, Redpoints is a brand intelligence solution that protects the revenue of brands and makes online shopping safer for both brands, consumers, and actually for the marketplaces in which products are sold. With the holiday fast approaching, and despite the COVID-19 pandemic, consumers will approach this year's gift giving a little bit differently. Deloitte every year does an annual sort of holiday projections on sales, and this year, on e-commerce sales. And this year, they estimate that e-commerce sales will grow somewhere around 25 to 35% year over year compared with last year's sales at the same time period. And last year, they had projected that e-commerce would be about 14.7% over 2018. So you can see this is double what their projections were last year at this same time. This report also projects for holiday sales, and we always think of holiday sales somewhere around November to January period, to be relatively flat, likely to show an increase, 1 to 1.5%. These numbers clearly show the impact of the pandemic and changing behaviors of consumers in this particular time frame. So with many consumers still spending the majority of their time at home and avoiding crowded public places, it's inevitable that more spending will take place online this holiday season. In Deloitte's projections, they're suggesting e-commerce sales will surge to about 182 billion to 196 billion during this same time period. And the slide we're looking at now, for 52% of the shoppers we surveyed, the most important online buying occasion is in fact Black Friday. But then when you add in Monday's cyber sales, you can see that 70% of those surveyed will shop on this very important weekend. Kind of crazy, I think, in terms of the volume that will take place in just a few short weekends. And as mentioned earlier, Redpoint surveys these 1,000 shoppers in late September to gather their behavior ahead of the season. And the numbers are always interesting, but the intent might be even more insightful for this year. For instance, this year, the pandemic will likely push shoppers to complete even more of their gift-giving purchase online. As many as 65% of those surveyed intend to shop online this holiday season. Even more interesting is those surveyed suggested that they would spend almost $289 more this holiday season than last year, which is a little bit weird given the circumstances we're in, but nonetheless, that was what the data showed. Similarly to this trend, 52% of consumers, if you go on to the next slide, Leticia, 52% of the consumers plan on shopping exclusively online. Last year when we ran this survey, 21% were going to shop online. So you can see a more than double the amount of people intend to do their exclusive holiday shopping online. This reinforces the importance of brands to maintain selling channels that are free from counterfeits ahead of the big day. And I was going to ask you, Jay, in your sort of research and in your experience, are you seeing the same sort of phenomenon that people are going to do majority of their shopping online?
Yeah, so great question. And I think if we just follow the I don't want to say the normal, but the abnormal pattern of shifts in behavior due to COVID lockdowns, but also declines in physical retail space. It's partly a fact, I believe, that consumers are looking to have more convenient options so they don't have to go out. I think a lot of consumers have gotten very comfortable shopping online because they were forced to during the pandemic. So, people that were maybe on the edge got pushed, but also there are some people that just have many fewer choices. And so I would not have expected the more than the doubling that you see here in terms of your numbers, but I'm not surprised that it's grown. This simply highlights the fact that there's opportunity, and counterfeiters know this information, right? They
Yes.
know that there's substantially more opportunity out there, and so the risk for brands and consumers is going to grow as well.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks. And I think over the last months, many brands have already been making fast moves to get a bigger piece of the e-commerce pie. Many brands are stretching Black Friday deals. For instance, just yesterday I was reading online, Amazon started their holiday dash. with thousands of deals between now and the end of the year in all their departments. And Target announced that it's having its own Target Day deal days during the same 2 days periods, and they're expecting a double-digit increase in the digital sales offered last year in electronics and beauty supplies, toys, games, and more. And big box retailers have also said that its Black Friday deals will likely run through the entire month of November. And again, this is this sort of stretching Black Friday that's phenomenon that's happening. And also, we're seeing new timelines for sale events. Not to over mention Amazon, but you may recall they have always had their Prime Day in July. This year it was moved to October. And now, of course, there are many reasons that it may have moved to October from July given the current circumstances. But what it really says is that, brands, marketplaces, it's time to get creative, and you've got to make adjustments in this new version of business. And last but not least, I think we're seeing retailers moving deals online so that fewer customers need to, kind of what Jay had said, crushing the crowds on Black Friday. So starting these deals much earlier, they've referred to it as a pull forward strategy for two reasons. I think one, first, to spread out the shopping so that customers who want to shop on stores, won't be in such a crowded environment. And second, to attract consumers early and maintain their market share. And I think, Jay, that kind of aligns with what you had said earlier.
Yeah, it does. I mean, these are challenging times, but also there's a great opportunity, particularly because we know that consumers that shift to the online space, when they have positive interactions and they have positive experiences, they tend to stay with some of those shopping experiences. So if Amazon, if Target, if Walmart, if Alibaba, if eBay, if they can create a consumer experience that draws people in, they're going to build some loyalty, not necessarily to brands, but to the platform that's going to extend, beyond this holiday season. And so as much as they can maximize those opportunities, it makes a lot of sense to do that.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think moving on to the next slide, when we asked our respondents which type of items they expect to buy, clothing and accessories, number one by far, electronics, of course, two, followed closely along with toys and games. And we actually saw housewares and home goods, right in there with toys and games in terms of a percentage of what people are looking to buy this holiday season. And I think all of these products, I don't think it's particularly one over another, but I think all of these products pose a risk for being counterfeited. With more sellers in the marketplaces throwing around all kind of deals, it becomes harder to spot legitimate product on legitimate channels. And I think there's this other new phenomenon that Jay, I was going to ask you about, is we're seeing new kinds of buyers who may not have been sophisticated online shoppers, but again, in order not to have to go out to the stores, they're using their iPads or their laptops to get online and buy, and they don't have the same sophistication that I think about my young kids at 26 and 28 who have sort of grown up purchasing online. Maybe people of my age, this may be a bit newer, and we're a bit more susceptible potentially.
Yeah, and you look at the way that online shopping works. It's not like you translate the physical experience directly over to the online experience. If you say, I'm going Christmas shopping, honey, and you go to the mall, we tend to have an idea of the things that we may want to buy, but we kind of browse around the store and find something that's nice, that fits the individuals for whom we want to purchase. When we go online, we tend to be directed in our searches, and the platforms are set up that way. And so you do a general search for, jewelry chests or armoires or, toys for the kids, and you put in specific, keywords. And whereas in the physical store, you may see a bunch of different products that fit within a certain category. Online, you see, a specific type of product, but multiple different offerings. And as you mentioned, it's very difficult to distinguish who the legitimate and illegitimate suppliers are, particularly because there are third-party sellers there. And, and this is not even to say, getting to the extreme of if, for instance, on some platforms, if you see it's sold by, a company, you say, oh yeah, Hasbro makes that toy and it's sold by Hasbro, but instead of Hasbro, it's Hasbro's. right? So they throw an S on
Exactly.
the end there. How many times do we actually pay attention to that, right? We just see,
Very
oh,
true.
yeah, it says. And so it's so easy, so easy to be deceived. And again, counterfeiters know this. Consumers are looking to buy and they think, oh, there's only one more left or only two more left. I've got to get this thing. Plus, shopping online, we are so much more price conscious. We're so much more aware of the potential to get a deal or to, spend wisely with our dollars that that deal that looks really, really good causes us to probably be less guarded about from whom we buy. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, we've seen in some of our previous research that price still is the number one factor causing people to buy right at the end of the day. And I wanted to move maybe into the second part of our presentation today, where we've gone through some of the cool data that we've got so far and give you a good sense of what's taking place in the e-commerce landscape. In part two, we'll have Jay share a little bit more in depth with us, his take on the rising issues in counterfeit and this year's unique Black Friday. But before we do that, I just wanted to share with you this particular quote. For those of you, again, who may or may not know, at Redpoints, we have about 700 brands whom we protect their IP worldwide. And as you can see from this quote from the general counsel at Foreo, that counterfeits impact is far-reaching and can be quite destructive to a brand's reputation. And unfortunately, our report shows that about 26% of consumers surveyed have experienced buying a fake product last year during Black Friday. So what does this mean for your brand? Well, first and foremost, it means that at a time when businesses are looking to recoup losses in sales, protecting your brand will be essential this holiday season. And my point really is this is not the time you want to share 5 or even 10% of your sales with a counterfeit / bad actor. It's time to fight the fight. And as we look into specific online channels, uh, we're seeing this year, obviously, marketplaces, e-commerce sites, social media appear to be all the key channels, which is what we might expect. And on that point, I'd like to bring in Jay to share more about your the growing online channels that you see problematic for brands as we move into this holiday season.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. So, one of the trends that we've noticed, and we started to notice it a while back, and many others in the industry have noticed it, and I'm sure that your partners have noticed it as well, is a shift to social media, right? So, particularly the use of social media platforms to do direct connecting to consumers. So we would see it through like Facebook Messenger, WeChat, things like that. But we've seen a different trend as of late, and when you think about the evolution of product counterfeiting schemes, generally they were driven by one of two things. It was driven by a change or an adaptation of technology. So, for instance, the rise of the internet, cellular telephony, things like that, creating different avenues by which consumers could connect through sellers and through the e-commerce platforms. And then adaptation by counterfeiters in response to law enforcement, brand owner, or solutions providers' activities, right? So those anti-counterfeiting strategies have an effect, forcing counterfeiters to shift. Now we're seeing social trends really driving changes in certain types of product counterfeiting. And particularly on certain social media channels, when we talk about consumer complicity, so individuals who go online looking specifically to buy counterfeit products, channels like TikTok and Instagram represent a really unique challenge for us because we see a very clear, very simple on the surface relationship where people may advertise something on TikTok, right? They'll talk about a product and they'll say, if you want to buy this replica or this dupe, go to my Instagram page. And those individuals likely have connections with counterfeiters where that distribution network doesn't have to go through an Amazon or an Alibaba or a DHgate, where they've got to put tons of product out there for long periods of time and worry about takedowns. If you can feed it through an influencer, there's this privacy wall and an additional veil that counterfeiters can hide behind and get very targeted advertising, a lot of sales in a very short period of time, and also influence consumers, not only their buying behaviors, but their attitudes about product counterfeiting at the same time. And so, while social media is driving a very particular aspect of counterfeit goods, I think one of the knockoff effects that we'll see in relation to just online sales in general is this sort of decreased aversion to replica, counterfeit, fake goods, right? So a lowering of guardianship, where there might be this perspective that, if I want, fake stuff or the replicas or the dupes, then I go to Instagram. But everything on these other platforms is good, or, I believe it's at least reputable or legitimate. So they may sort of create this compartmentalization where social media or some other channels are the place they go for particular types of goods. Why this is really important is, again, we don't have a lot of transparency on the entire supply chain. It's not like there's a platform like an Alibaba out there that keeps records on the sellers. There's a lot less visibility through social media behind which counterfeiters can hide. And if that's a growing business model, it's a real challenge. And so, this slide is, I think, a wonderful kind of 5 reasons why this needs to be important. Social media, it's really, really easy to promote things through social media. And again, as trends change, particularly in the way that brand owners go to market through social media, using influencers, right? Drop videos, other things. Counterfeiters are going to pick up on that. It's very, very easy to do, very easy to replicate. But it also forces us to be more reactive in many ways, right? The growth of social media influencers means that counterfeiters don't need to rely on the legitimacy of a particular site. They can use the influence of an individual to shape consumer behaviors and perceptions, which is a much different approach. It's a very cheap approach, particularly if all you have to do is give someone one counterfeit product, as opposed to spending a ton of money on, on whatever. The other thing to really worry about with social media is that it's very easy to connect payment and shopping. So if you're on your phone looking at TikTok and somebody advertises a purse or a wallet or something, and you say, "Ooh, I want that," and you go to their Instagram page, which is just a few more clicks, and you say, "Hey, DM me if you want this." You DM them, and then they say, "Here's my PayPal account, send me the money." You can do it through Venmo, you can do it through PayPal. Everything happens right there on your phone. And so the increase in technology has made it much, much simpler to connect social media purchases through all these other platforms and applications that make our lives easier. And again, it puts many more veils of privacy around things because it's all not filtering through one site. We've got multiple sites that each can protect, aspects of the counterfeiters' distribution and supply chains. It's also really easy to share information. So, it used to be that when you wanted to buy counterfeits, say you were a distributor, right? You set up your stall in a marketplace and you want to buy a bunch of counterfeit purses to get ready for the holiday buying season. You got to make a trip to New York or Chicago or recently Atlanta or Houston, pick up a bunch of stuff and bring it back, or at least get it mailed over from China. Now, and if those people get taken down, there were some issues with getting in touch with their base. Now it's send me a DM, I'll send you my personal email address, right? You can connect with me very quickly. That way you can see my new catalog. Counterfeiters do produce product catalogs, by the way, which is really, really insane, right? But here's my new lineup for the fall, right? Tell me what you want. And then finally, it's so easy to target not only brands, but also consumers. We put so much personal information out there on social media. We share so much about our likes and our dislikes that counterfeiters, the bar is so low to target ads specifically to consumers to encourage that buying behavior that it's so easy to pull on consumers' purse strings. Yeah. So, when we think about the impact of product counterfeiting, obviously there's a fall in sales, right? Now, we can look at this in a couple different ways. If you have that consumer complicity, so people who are looking specifically for counterfeit goods, they were likely never going to buy your legitimate good anyway. Some may have, but most weren't. But the biggest one, particularly in this holiday season, are losses through legitimate e-commerce platforms. Counterfeiters, and we said this, many other people have said this, they are a direct competitor to legitimate businesses, right? You have to account for that. And so the losses that you may see from legitimate peers, right, they're going to be mirrored by counterfeiters as well. And diverting that business away, particularly, Daniel, as you mentioned, in these times, right, that revenue is very, very important. Again, particularly at these times. So you've got to try and maintain that as well as you can. But the other part is counterfeits do create that sense of unfair competition. if you work through distribution and you have a legitimate distribution stream set up, then as the counterfeiters are taking away from those partners as well. And not only is that hurting your brand, but it's creating a bit of a disincentive for maybe potential some channel partners to continue doing work in this area, right? So it's not only you that gets harmed, there's a holistic picture that needs to be taken into place. Daniel, you're gonna.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. No, I was just nodding my head and like, you took the words right out of my mouth. That's awesome. Keep going.
Okay, yeah, sorry. Yeah, so it's that's very important to consider, is that it's just not you in this fight. But what's important to that also is that these channel partners, they can assist you in guardianship efforts, right? So we talk a lot about how do you engage supplier and distribution partners to increase the scope of your brand protection efforts, and you can do that in this holiday season as well. Right? And then brand reputation, right? We talk about this all the time, but you can't harp on it enough. You can't reiterate this enough, that counterfeits harm consumers and they harm your brand because people associate that negative product not necessarily with where they got the product, but with whose name is on the good. And so even though people may say, "Oh, that's a cute purse. Where'd you get it?" "Oh, I got it off Amazon." If that purse fails, if it off gases or the colors leach and it ruins some of your clothes or whatever, they're not going to say, "Oh, well, Amazon made this really bad purse." They're going to say, "No, all right, this company made a really bad purse." And so while they associate getting particular deals from a platform, they'll likely associate product failure with your particular brand. And this does not even touch upon the risk to health and safety, right? So counterfeit electrical cords, batteries, pharmaceuticals, health and beauty supplies. It is impossible to understate the damage that can be done, the reputational damage that can be done if counterfeits harm some of your consumers, right? There is, I don't want to say it's irreparable, but it is very difficult to deal with that, because you can't simply say, "Oh, well, those were counterfeits. It wasn't our product, so it wasn't us that harmed people." That response doesn't fly, right? You have to be responsive to it. But even then, the harm is substantial.
Yeah, I think that's true, Jay. One of the biggest mistakes I think sometimes brands think of is, well, the counterfeit stuff isn't good quality. It doesn't even work from an electronic component perspective. But that's the beauty of counterfeiting. It doesn't have to work. The only name on the box is your name as a brand. And we've seen a lot of people when they call the brand and say, "Hey, I've got one of these items and it didn't work or malfunctioned or the color, faded." And the brand says, "Well, I'm sorry, that's not ours." You see sometimes on their own website or on their social media pages that the consumer, with their heart, because it's their hard-earned money and they wanted it to be real, they sort of suggest that the brand is a lousy at customer service. They don't stand behind their product, and I would never buy from this brand again. And not only now do you have a reputational issue, but now it's out there on social media, not so easy to get rid of.
No, it's not. And particularly given the fact that, relationships on social media drive perceptions. We're more likely to trust when a friend tells us something about a product than some arbitrary review that we see out there.
Correct.
Those are what we call vicarious experiences.
Yes.
And they legitimately impact people's perceptions of a product. "Oh, I'll never buy that," right? I had a horrible experience. And we've known for a while that it's natural human behavior. We're more likely to talk about things that fail than we are that succeed. Right? I don't really need to give a good review if it went well, but I really need to tell somebody if this thing failed.
Correct.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. And I think that was extremely insightful. I think that helps sort of understand some of the challenges that are facing brands for this year's Black Friday. And in this next section, I think what we're looking to do is potentially, talk about some actions brands can take to mitigate this risk as much as possible in the amount of time that's left at this point going forward. And I think if you move on to, thank you, Letitia, many of the big marketplaces that we've mentioned, they're actively working to deliver a trusted shopping experience. They get the value of making sure consumers have good experiences on their platforms. But having said that, it takes an active community to make a bigger impact. Brands should engage with platforms regularly to understand their policies, to provide feedback on the processes and the tools they have available for removing bad actors. The ability to alert and advise platforms on the ever-evolving behavior that they see happening as trends that are essential to making the marketplace, maintaining pace with those bad actors. So that's critical. I think. Go ahead, Jay.
Yeah. Can I jump in for a second? I
Yeah,
think the
please.
slide that you had previously with Amazon, Facebook, Alibaba, eBay. This is really important, right? Many times we get into this back and forth of finger pointing, right? The brands are saying, "Hey, platform, you're not doing your job and keeping counterfeiters off of your platform." And the platforms are saying, it's your responsibility as a brand owner to protect your brand. You need to help us do this by sharing information about, we don't know your trademarks, right? So we need better collaboration. Law enforcement needs interaction there. And Daniel, what you said is really, really important, and I think it needs to be repeated, that cooperation and collaboration across brands, with platforms, with law enforcement, that's the key to really getting to this, to really mitigating these threats. Information sharing, working together. Yes, each platform and each brand has, a responsibility to themselves and to their shareholders, right? So there's going to be organizational tension, right? There's going to be some tensions that need to be worked through, but ultimately, disengaging from potential relationships is the wrong approach to take.
Totally.
That collaborative space, right? It needs to be worked.
Yeah, couldn't said it better. I think you're spot on. And we were going to share these 3 pillars of brands can take to sort of act positively, right? So one is when I think about, the reseller visibility, now is the time to make sure that your online channels are monitored and free of counterfeits as much as possible. Communication, as we mentioned, is key, right? That might sound too easy, but transparent communication is really one of the most effective ways to counter fakes and counterfeits, especially in the digital space. Organizations can be also critical. They can help point to reliable resources that help educate. We're seeing some brands today, warning consumers on their own website to be on the lookout for counterfeit products, maybe even some indicators. It's a very touchy thing. Not every brand wants to talk about counterfeits, but we're seeing some very proactive brands start to put on their own website, be on the alert for counterfeit products of our brand, right? Really important. And I think about, as you just mentioned, the partner relationship, the collaboration piece. Equally important is this is relevant to the authorities and peers might be experiencing similar challenges. A good approach to collaboration through industry associations, through counterfeiting initiatives, through all sorts of different areas to help streamline authorities and collect best practices. And lastly, I'd say strategic monitoring, right? Effective brand protection strategies, concentrating and monitoring enforcements, and make priority platforms such as marketplace, standalone websites, or social media, ensure that your brand has solid integrity. And I think, maybe I said maybe lastly before, but I think lastly, this is better. On the next slide, keeping abreast of new legislation is a great add-on for more long-term strategic thinking, because it's a long game and a short game at the same time. And I think, Jay, you're probably better suited to talk about some of this legislation that's it hasn't passed, but it's certainly on the table.
Yeah. Before I do that, I want to say the 3 pillars you talked about, I think, are really, really good. And again, I want to reinforce what you said, because we in criminology we have what's called situational crime prevention. And basically, it's a theory about strategic responses to identified criminal schemes. And counterfeiting is one of those crimes that has like what we call a stable opportunity structure. It's a very rational type of crime. And the activities you talk about fall under several different of the techniques that we use, but one that I think it really highlights is this idea of assisting compliance. And so you mentioned, having websites on a brand owner's page that directs consumers with, where to go to report counterfeits, or, where to go to get answers about potential counterfeits. As you create avenues to assist with compliance, we tend to find that people who are really genuinely, want to be on the pro-social side of things, they take up those opportunities. We see this across multiple areas. Insider theft within organizations. The Association of Certified Fraud Examiners has found that the #1 way that people identify internal frauds is from a tip. And so there's such a great opportunity to do what we call assisting compliance and follow some really, theoretically informed approaches through the strategies you talked about. So
Awesome.
sorry,
Yeah.
I just want to throw that
No,
in.
no, it's perfect. Love it. Love it.
Great. So in regard to the legislation, so we've got 3 forms of legislation out there. I'm not a lawyer, so I can't talk about the legalese on them. But basically,
You haven't
each
played one
one
on TV, have you?
I have not played one on TV, but only because it doesn't pay well. So each of these pieces of legislation tries to address the idea of transparency with consumers from different angles. And the goal is to get Congress involved in making sure that consumers know or have a better idea of who the third-party sellers are that are operating on these platforms. So each of them has a requirement to say, as a platform, you have to share with consumers the names of these sellers, their business address, an email address, a phone number, right? In some cases, whether they're a seller or not. Each one of them focuses on a different category of goods. The Santa Act focuses on products for children. Inform, I think, is pharmaceuticals or healthcare, and then Safe Shop is around consumer goods. But they all come together, and the overlap is they want to drive additional transparency so that consumers can be better informed about the shopping purchases they make when they're on online marketplaces, removing some of those veils that obscure the counterfeiters as they're operating on these sites. But importantly, Daniel, as you just mentioned, this is one part of the puzzle. If platforms, increase this level of transparency, the question then is, what do consumers do with that information once they get it? And if brands have a connection on that, they can report, hey, this person's selling this product, are they an authorized seller? Or is this shop an authorized shop? If there's a way they can verify that information with brands, it just makes that shopping experience much more informative, much safer for consumers. But we also have to incentivize them to do that behavior, which we know can be a bit difficult.
Yeah, and of course, in the sort of unintended consequence of that too is sort of you might find your legitimate product out there being sold by someone you don't know, which then sort of helps alert you to you've got a supply chain issue. Some of the things that you might have set up for your business aren't working in terms of the way you thought distribution, would go. So any of those things will sort of come out of that zone as well.
That's an excellent point. And I'll draw back to an example that we had with one of our partners in the center who had noticed that they had a problem with Chinese e-commerce websites in the Alibaba group. And there were counterfeiters who were set up in China that were selling their product, and they didn't sell in China. But what they realized is we have a market here that we need to take advantage of. And so how can we address this problem but also grow our market presence in a new area? And so, these things can be points of opportunity.
Sure. I think you're spot on. Yes, I've heard that a number of times too, in terms of it alerts you to where your product is very popular, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
that's awesome. So we'll move on. We'll move on to our third section of the webinar and turn it over to Oliver to give us a walkthrough on what you are going to do for us, Ollie.
Good stuff. Thanks for that, Daniel. So hi, everyone. To close the webinar, I'd like to share with you a little story of one of our clients who we've actually been helping deal with the online counterfeits of their brand, ultimately giving them back a bit of time. And the main thing being that we're able to gain back some of the otherwise lost revenues, which were being kind of routed off to these counterfeiters. So the customer in question, for those that you're not familiar with, is Bala Bangles. Now, Bala is a movement company headquartered in LA. They actually pitched their company on Shark Tank to see if they could get any one of the sharks to invest. So they successfully managed to secure $900,000 of investment from not only Maria Sharapova, but also Mark Cuban, and went on to become an internet success. So they actually specialize in modern fitness equipment, an industry that's witnessed a surge in online sales since the start of the quarantine. So Bala's episode of Shark Tank premiered on the 28th of February, shortly just before many of the quarantine measures were actually put in place to stop COVID-19. So that basically resulted in a sharp increase in sales, but also naturally an increase in counterfeits, which then piggybacked on the brand's success. So in order to support them in tackling this strong issue, we've been working with them for just under a year now. And for today's webinar, they've actually accepted to give you guys a look into their brand intelligence platform. So I'm going to give you a quick walkthrough, and I'll show you what data they have access to and how they've been taking actions in order to do that. So what you should be able to see right now is the Redpoints platform. So what we've actually been doing on behalf of Bala Bangles is mimicking the search action of individual users across marketplaces and bringing those listings into our database. So you can see at the very first point of logging into the platform, the full kind of funnel of the process that we see. So the total number of detections of what we've found, how many have actually matched the products that we're looking for. So you can see here that we've got quite expansive keywords because we understand that counterfeiters can be using various techniques in order to prevent being detected is probably the best way to do it. And we're basically able to show the full funnel from the point of what we've found through to what we've taken down. So what we're able to kind of provide our customers is the ability to, no matter what marketplace these suspected infringements have been found on, is a quick view as to how and what has been found that's out there. So here we can see, you can see at the bottom here that we've got various different marketplaces where they've been found, including AliExpress, Amazon, etc. And let's look at one as an example. So what the user is basically meant to do is just review the images that we've extracted from the marketplaces. You can see the date and time of when it was detected, the listing title, the site price, and some very key information such as stock to really draw in how likely these are to be infringing the intellectual property of the brand themselves. At the click of the button, you're able to confirm to Redpoints that that is indeed infringing the intellectual property. And from that point, Redpoints will take the remainder of that process to ensure that that link is actually taken down. So we're detecting every day. We're constantly going out, finding what matches these specific keywords that we're looking for. And we're also monitoring whether that's up or not to make sure that the marketplace is as clean as possible. So that's really the kind of user side of it. The next part is mainly due to kind of the data extraction, and it really draws into what Jay was talking about earlier on, which is due to the transparency of the platform. When we're talking about the total volume of detections that we've had, how successful we are in enforcements, this can also draw on to those emerging markets that are there. If we're seeing a potentially high volume of infringements in a particular territory, this could then show that potentially you need to be registering your intellectual property rights over there if you haven't already, or potentially taking more care. And all of that data can be taken from within this platform. We can share the total volume of sellers, how many infringements per seller, how many enforcements, and all of this data can be fed into our automation platform to create things like automatic enforcement rules if a certain criteria is met. I'll be happy to talk a lot more in detail should anyone wish, but I think as a brief overview, that should give you an idea as to how the Redpoints platform works and what sort of data we can basically share with you.
Thanks, all. I appreciate doing a high-level overview for us. That's awesome. And with that, we will happen to entertain any questions that anyone may have from the webinar. You're welcome to type them into the questions section, and we're happy to answer them. There is a couple questions that seem to be there now. One says, speaking of social media, is it easier to take down a counterfeit product from a marketplace than it is from, say, a social media site like Facebook, Twitter? Ollie, you want to take that one?
Sure. So in general, it really depends on which marketplace in question. From a Redpoint's perspective, we have very key people within the business, such as yourself, Daniel, who are able to basically manage the relationships that we're lucky to have with these types of marketplaces. Generally speaking, yes, it is. It really depends which route it's coming from. It depends on the marketplace in question, the connection that we have with the marketplace, what requirements there are on their side in order to actually take that specific listing down.
Yeah, I think for us, to your point, it's almost equally easy. We don't really struggle on either case. I mean, they're both pretty well done. I guess in the run up to the holiday season, have you witnessed an increase in the number of counterfeits amongst your clients? And if so, what industry? I'll take that one. For us, we have seen approximately a 58% increase in counterfeiting, sort of post-COVID, pre-COVID versus post-COVID. Some of the industries we've seen it hit the hardest so far has been the fitness area, up about 110%. The toy and game industry, I think as parents over the summer were keeping their kids active with games and other things, we saw that up almost 94%. So we've seen huge category bumps in increases in those areas. Let's see. One more question. Are you able to protect my design patents as well? And the answer is design patents, utility patents can be a little bit more challenging. Certain marketplaces, certain social media platforms are easier than others, but there's a little bit of move to help brands today on design patents. Europe, it's a bit easier. Again, certain marketplaces, but we certainly will make a gallant effort to do that. It can be challenging, but depending on how good the patent is and how broad it's listed, is our ability to help the brands. So I don't know that there's any other questions out there. And I think with that, the thing I can do is thank Jay for your time and your insight. It was invaluable. I thank you for walking through the platform. And we appreciate all those who joined us. And we look forward to having a great holiday season. Hope your shopping is safe and be safe out there in the world today. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you all.
Take care.